Hello, and welcome to the UFO Radio Show. I'm your host, the station manager. Whether you're into UFOs, consciousness, the paranormal, or if you just want to wind down, kick back with a drink, and ponder some interesting stories, you're in the right place. We come to you from the misty hills above the world-famous Loch Ness, deep in the heart of the Scottish Highlands. Please hit like and subscribe if you enjoy the broadcast. Now here's what we have for you on this episode of the UFO Radio Show. Stand by. In this special broadcast, we bring you the amazing story of Bob Lazar. At 5 p.m. on May 15th, 1989, 30-year-old Bob Lazar sat in the passenger seat of a pickup truck. The sun was behind him, so he knew he would be in silhouette. It still felt dangerous to talk out loud about all of this, let alone to a television camera live on air to all of Nevada. But he felt like he had no choice. It was then that George Knapp, investigative reporter and anchor at KLS-TV in Las Vegas, began his interview with Lazar. For the camera, he was referred to as Dennis. Bob told the entire world that he, for the past 6 months, had been working at a highly secretive government facility in the Nevada desert, reverse engineering one of 9 alien flying saucers. Bob Lazar was born on January 26, 1959 in Coral Gables, Florida. It would be accurate to say that his childhood was pretty well defined by a strong interest in science and mechanics. From a young age, he was a hands-on tinkerer. He would perform experiments and build unusual creations. Lazar grew up on Long Island in New York State before moving to Los Angeles, where he went to public school and attended Pierce Junior College. Lazar says he went on to obtain master's degrees in physics from MIT and in electronics from Caltech. He eventually moved to New Mexico, where he worked at Los Alamos National Laboratories as a physicist. Lazar says his involvement in reverse engineering flying saucers began indirectly while he was working at Los Alamos. While Bob carried out his assigned tasks, the famous physicist Edward Teller, the Edward Teller who developed the hydrogen bomb, was also working at the labs. It seems a newspaper story about some guy who converted his 1979 Honda Civic into a jet car caught Teller's eye. Teller read that the inventor installed a T-58 jet engine, typically used in helicopters, into the hatchback. Teller was amused by the article and by the fact that the inventor, Bob Lazar, was a young scientist currently working at Los Alamos. After finishing his contract at Los Alamos, Bob sent out his resume to various companies in a search for work. He even sent one to Edward Teller, reminding him that they both had coincidentally worked at Los Alamos at the same time. Teller remembered the article about the jet car and called Bob for a chat. Teller got on well with Lazar and ultimately put him in touch with a contact at EG&G regarding some high-level work he knew to be taking place that Bob might find interesting. Well, a referral from Edward Teller is truly a once-in-a-lifetime situation for a physicist, and there was no way Bob was going to miss the opportunity. In early to mid-December of 1988, he made contact with Teller's connection and soon arrived in Las Vegas at EG&G for an interview. The offer was for work on some advanced propulsion systems. He was told that if he wanted the position, he would need to undergo security clearances. This was a dream come true. Bob went through the security checks and the interviews to obtain the clearances he would need. On his first day of work, Bob Lazar was unceremoniously thrust into the top-secret world. He was flown from a private terminal at McCarran Airport, now Harry Reid International Airport, to a remote airstrip near Groom Lake within Area 51. The commute took place aboard a top-secret, privately chartered commuter jetliner. The airline was affectionately referred to by those in the know as Janet Airlines. Once he arrived within Area 51, he was taken to a small bus with blacked-out windows. He was driven in this bus through the desert to the S4 facility at Papoose Lake, an installation within Area 51 that, to this day, has yet to be officially acknowledged to exist. When he disembarked, he saw heavily armed guards posted all over the site. He began a briefing led by his supervisor, a man named Dennis. Bob was told to keep his eyes looking where he was told to look, and to touch nothing. He was taken into an open hangar built into the side of a mountain. There were other doors built into the mountain, but they were all closed. All of the doors were camouflaged on the outside to look like the natural landscape they had been built into. This was the moment Bob came to appreciate as being one of the most profound in his life. Inside of the hangar was, well, a flying saucer. Bob was shocked upon seeing the disc. The specific craft he saw in this bay was what Bob later dubbed as the sports model, owing to its particularly sleek design. This was nothing like any advanced aeronautical design he had ever seen, heard of, or imagined. His first thought was, this must be an advanced fighter jet or something similar. He figured UFO stories were clearly based on the misinterpretation of this kind of military technology. The craft appeared metallic and had a smooth, pewter, or titanium-like color. It had no right angles. All of the edges were curved and seamless. There were no rivets, control surfaces, panel lines, nothing. Just a smooth sculptural shape. And it was big, some 30 to 40 feet in diameter. In a moment of disbelief, wonder, and pure fascination, Bob reached out and slid his hand along the side of the craft. It felt cool and smooth, almost like liquid. This action was met with a curt and unambiguous reprimand from his armed escort. No touching. The heavily armed guards, who were ubiquitous, made it clear they were prepared to enforce all security protocols. After being quickly ushered away from the craft, Lazar says Dennis explained an important critical factor. And it was this. The vehicle Bob just saw, the one he touched with his own hand, was of extraterrestrial origin. It was not made on Earth. It was not a human construction. The revelation took a while to settle in. Bob admitted that he was not only shocked, but felt a deep sense of humility upon realizing that humanity was not alone in the universe. Bob was taken to a small room with a table and chair in it. On the table sat a number of neat blue folders. He was left in the room to examine them at his leisure. Within these folders were a series of briefing documents. He was told this collection of folders were intended to give scientists an overview of the entire project, rather than just their specific, compartmentalized area of expertise. Whether true or not, this was all Bob was ever going to be told about the nature and history of what he was going to be working on. Bob has offered a few specific details about the file's contents. Within some documents, human beings were referred to as containers for consciousness or souls. He did not elaborate further, but this single detail has fueled extensive speculation among theorists about the nature of human identity, consciousness, and the possibility of manipulation by extraterrestrial interests. The documents provided a summary of a long-standing extraterrestrial contact with human beings over the past 10,000 years. Lazar speculates that some of the information, if true, was so sensitive and profound that it would challenge and potentially destabilize established world religious beliefs. He claimed that this was one of the reasons given for the government's continued secrecy. Some of the craft were said to be obtained through an unspecified form of exchange or deal with a non-human civilization. At least one of the 9 alien craft was believed to have been an archaeological find. This particular craft was known to be very old, suggesting it had been on Earth for a significant period before its discovery. Other craft had been retrieved from crash sites. To Bob, the variety of saucers held by the government would suggest multiple historic retrieval scenarios. He was never really sure if all the information he was given was true, or if truths were mixed with falsehoods to provide a confused and plausibly deniable basis on which to refute claims should they arise. In the course of his work, Bob had access to the sport model for study and analysis. This is the craft he saw upon his arrival at S4. The disc looked to be molded from a single common material, at least on the surface. There were no seams or joins. There weren't any sharp edges. Everything had a radius. No rivets, bolts, or welds. There weren't even any real straight edges to speak of. Everything seemed to gracefully blend together. The symmetry was perfect. The color of the saucer reminded him of pewter or titanium. It wasn't glossy or mirror polished. It had a more satin finish. It didn't feel completely like metal either. There was a ceramic quality to it, not fragile or weak in any way, but something crystalline, hard, and resilient. It almost felt like you were touching it through a layer of liquid, but it was, of course, dry. One of the most profound observations that no one openly spoke of was the most painfully obvious: the size of the seats in the craft. They were small, really small. Bob's first instinct had him thinking of them as seats for children, but that obviously didn't make sense. No, these seats were small because the crew were small. Within the craft, the general headroom, door gaps, and access ways, as few as there were, drove this point home. Although Bob and his team could manage the cramped conditions within the craft, this was no space designed for adult humans to spend any time in. Lazar explained how his primary task at S4 involved experimenting with an anti-gravity generator or reactor removed from one of the discs. He was to work on it with a view to reverse engineering the device for the purposes of reproduction and human exploitation. The reactor was a modest-looking construction. It consisted of a plate approximately 40 centimeters square by 5 centimeters thick, on which was fixed a 60-millimeter diameter truncated cone, approximately 15 centimeters in height. A triangular gold chip of the reactor's fuel was placed in the truncated cone structure, and a hemispherical lid was placed over the cone and fuel assembly. The fuel was a stable version of element 115. At the time, physicists thought element 115 to be theoretical, and for all intents and purposes it was. It would be a number of years before any form of element 115 was synthesized, and it would only survive for a fraction of a second. Bob could only assume that the element 115 he had worked with was obtained from the same place as the craft themselves. Bob carried out a number of specific experiments and observations related to the reactor's functions. He observed that when the reactor was powered up, it would produce a localized gravitational field around itself. Lazar experienced this field directly. He would try to place his hand against the dome of the reactor as it silently ran. He found this to be utterly impossible to do. As his hand approached the dome, he would feel an increasing resistance. It was like trying to push two magnets together at their like poles. No amount of pressure would allow contact to be made. Lazar describes demonstrations where the generator's power created intense, localized gravitational areas that actually bent light, and in doing so, formed a, quote, little black disk which sat in midair in front of them. It seems space-time was directly distorted by the reactor's function. Bob further recounts that he and a colleague observed the effects of the reactor on a burning candle. When within the reactor's field, the candle flame appeared to stop flickering and remain stationary, as if time had slowed or even stopped for it. Despite looking this way, the flame was still visibly luminous and produced heat. Lazar says the effect was caused by a massive time dilation in the area where the reactor's gravitational field was focused. After gaining an understanding of the properties of the reactor, he turned his attention to the other hardware within the saucer itself. Lazar, along with his associates, worked on understanding how the craft's 3 movable gravity amplifiers were used to generate, strengthen, and direct gravity waves. These amplifiers could create both gravitic attraction and gravitic repulsion effects. By manipulating gravity, the craft could operate without traditional inertia, allowing for instantaneous changes in speed and direction without causing crushing G-forces for the occupants. The ship's 3 gravity wave emitters, or amplifiers, could be focused on a point in space. By focusing gravity waves, the craft could create a gravity well ahead of itself. This gravity well would effectively pull space itself towards the ship. The craft would then shut off the gravity well, allowing space to instantaneously snap back into place, taking the craft along with it. Lazar claims he observed test flights of the craft on several occasions while working at the facility. He said that the craft, when powered up, would hum quietly and then would gently lift off the ground with no visible expulsion of exhaust. It would shift position in the air effortlessly and could make abrupt, almost instantaneous, extreme maneuvers and then quietly settle back onto the ground. We should bear in mind that employees of top-secret programs are legally obliged not to speak of their work to anyone, including their immediate family, husbands, wives, children, parents, etc., etc. No one is to know of their loved one's work. Employees are given cover stories and false documentation to aid in this deception. Less well known to Bob was that all above top-secret contractors at S4 are continuously monitored for anything that might go on in their public or private life, which could leave them in a situation where they might become an active security risk. From March to April of 1989, Bob became increasingly concerned for his and his wife's safety. Things didn't feel right. There was an atmosphere change at the base. His hours at work had been decreased, and he just generally felt uneasy. It turned out that S4 intelligence personnel had discovered, via tapping his phone and direct surveillance, that Bob's wife was having an extramarital affair. Because of the upset and emotional chaos Bob was expected to soon undergo as a result of his wife's secret activities, he was placed on decreased hours, and the surveillance that was already on him was increased. It is assumed that these steps were taken to minimize risk or impact on the program from his impending troubles. This was one of a number of things Bob was sensing the vibe of at S4. Bob felt unfairly manipulated and controlled. He sensed these secretive activities, but wasn't aware of why it was happening. The grim atmosphere, isolation, often less than subtle surveillance, along with his reduced hours made him extremely stressed. Those who were in charge of this program were very serious people, and they would let nothing jeopardize their secret work. Nothing at all. For Bob, a sense of wonder was slipping away. What he felt now was fear. He decided that he had to have something in place for protection, and that something, that insurance policy, was needed now. Bob chose to reveal his knowledge and his experiences of S4 with his friends and family, hoping the exposure would provide a measure of protection or backup. He had become concerned that if he suddenly went missing, his disappearance could easily be covered up by the government. He needed corroboration for his story. On 2 occasions, he took friends to the desert to see some test flights of the craft that he knew were scheduled. He even successfully videoed one of those test flights. Bob arranged a 3rd trip. The group of people who accompanied him on this trip included Gene Huff, a Las Vegas real estate appraiser and close friend of Bob's; John Lear, a retired airline pilot, CIA contractor, and well-known UFO theorist. Lear had previously connected Bob with a credible journalist who would soon directly change Lazar's life; George Knapp, Bob's 3rd guest, an investigative reporter from Las Vegas TV station KLAS. George was well known for his serious interest in the UFO subject. The evening of the next excursion progressed as Bob had predicted, and the test flight was indeed filmed. Unfortunately, Bob and his guests had been spotted by Area 51 security patrols, and they were all suddenly being detained where they stood by the security patrol and a Lincoln County Sheriff deputy. Their identities were confirmed, and personal information was taken. They were informed that they had been trespassing on federal land and were to leave immediately. Bob was subsequently called at his home the next day. It was his supervisor, Dennis. Lazar was informed in no uncertain terms that his employment was terminated immediately. The call was short and sweet. Dennis ended the conversation by asking, "Do you have any idea what we will do to you now?" Whereupon he hung up. Bob understood that this ominous remark, combined with his abrupt firing, was a direct consequence of him exposing the secret test flights to his friends, which was viewed as a severe security breach. He felt like a man with a target on his back for sure. Following the termination for some months, Bob says he and his wife experienced further harassment, including their phone being bugged, overt physical surveillance, and Bob's education and employment records being permanently erased, all of which he has interpreted as direct retribution for exposing the project. Bob was deeply concerned that he and others working on the program were at continuous risk of being silenced permanently. He viewed the government's concealment of advanced extraterrestrial technology as a crime against the American people and the scientific community. In his view, openly revealing all of the information he could remember about his work at S4 was the right thing to do. It would expose the possibility of extraordinary technological advancements for the benefit of all of humanity, and it might just keep him alive. So Lazar agreed to an unscheduled live TV interview with journalist George Knapp of KLAS-TV in Las Vegas. At 5 p.m. on May 15, 1989, 30-year-old Bob Lazar sat in the passenger seat of a pickup truck with the sun behind him, throwing him into silhouette on camera. He sure wasn't going to use his real name on TV, so what name should he give? With a wry smile, Bob Lazar decided on a name. They can call him Dennis. And that's all we have for now. This is the station manager, asking you to join us again soon for another episode of the UFO Radio Show.